I thought Max was just another rescue dog, quiet, loyal, maybe a little haunted like me. But the night he slipped through the fence and vanished into the woods, I followed him and walked straight into a ghost from my past. An abandoned military base no one talks about, a mission we were ordered to forget, and a truth buried so deep only a dog could dig it back up. What we found in that darkness. It didn't just change me, it changed everything. Max wasn't like other dogs, not anymore. Ever since we brought him home from the shelter, he'd been quiet, too quiet, like he was always listening for something we couldn't hear. He was well behaved, never barked, barely played, just watched. But what struck me most was the way he stood at the edge of the yard every single night, staring into the woods like it owed him an answer. I'd tried everything, called him in, tossed a tennis ball, brought out chicken. He'd glance at me, polite, obedient, but always returned to that same spot, same time, same direction, like clockwork. I figured he was looking for his old family. Maybe that's why he paced when the sun went down. Maybe they'd lived somewhere out past the tree line. Or maybe something happened back there, something Max hadn't let go of. The first time I saw it, I didn't think much of it. He stood frozen, muscles taut, tail low, ears pointed straight ahead. But the second night, and the third, and everyone after, that's when I started wondering. I'd only moved to this property 6 months ago. It was supposed to be quiet, peaceful, a good place to disappear. After 22 years of military service, all I wanted was silence. I never imagined I'd end up watching my own dog wait for ghosts. Then one night, I caught him whining, not loud, just this low, strained sound, like he was holding something in. He pawed at the dirt once, then looked over his shoulder at me, eyes shining in the dark. I'd never seen a dog look that serious before. "Max," I said, "what are you waiting for?" He didn't move, just went back to staring at the trees. I don't know why, but it hit me harder than I expected, like he knew something I didn't, like he'd been waiting for me to ask. I walked out to him that night, barefoot, letting the grass sting my feet. He didn't turn to greet me, didn't wag his tail, just stood there, like a soldier at his post. I stood beside him, looked out into the dark. Nothing moved. But I felt it, not a breeze, not an animal. Just this cold tug in my gut, the kind you get right before a firefight. Something was out there, or maybe under it. I rested a hand on Max's back. He was trembling. That's when I knew. Whatever was out there, he wasn't afraid of it. He was trying to protect me from it, or maybe lead me to it. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Max. He stayed by the fence till dawn, never lying down, never blinking, just waiting. It started with a sound I hadn't heard before, low, sharp, urgent. Max didn't bark often, but this wasn't a bark. It was something else. A call, a decision, the kind a soldier makes when orders no longer matter. I was halfway through my beer when I heard it. By the time I reached the back door, he was gone. The gate hadn't been left open, he'd leapt it. Instinct kicked in before thought did. I grabbed my coat, yanked the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and bolted after him. My boots thudded against the earth, but the forest swallowed the sound. Branches whipped my face, cold air filled my lungs. And ahead, just barely, I could hear the crunch of paws in dry leaves. Max didn't stop. He didn't look back. He wanted me to follow. I'd avoided these woods for a reason. Even in daylight, they had a stillness I didn't trust. But now, under moonlight filtered through tangled limbs, they looked almost familiar, too familiar, like a place I'd dreamed of, but never dared to remember. The flashlight beam danced between trees, and for a second I saw him, just his tail disappearing behind a slope. I called out. He didn't slow. I kept moving. Up the hill, past rusted fence posts, long overtaken by vines. That's when I saw the path, half covered in moss and fallen branches. But there, a trail, faint, like something once used, but long forgotten. Max was waiting just ahead, finally still, staring down the path, like he'd known it was here all along. I stepped up beside him, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. The forest was dead quiet now. I looked at Max. He looked at me. Then without hesitation, he walked forward. And I followed. With every step, pieces of the past came loose in my mind. A campfire, a voice on the radio, a kid's laugh echoing off concrete. It didn't make sense, not yet. But something in me knew. This wasn't just a trail through the woods. It was a road back to something I'd buried. Half an hour in, we reached a clearing. The trees thinned, and in the flashlight's glow, something massive loomed out of the dark. Concrete, steel, faded warnings in peeling paint, an old military structure long abandoned. My breath caught. I knew this place, not from maps, not from photos. I knew it like I'd left it yesterday. Max sat beside me, silent, watching. That's when I understood. He hadn't gotten lost. He'd brought me home. The gate looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe that's what time does. It shrinks the monsters and magnifies the ghosts. Rust clung to the wire like dead ivy, and one of the pine trees had grown around the top bar like it was trying to swallow it whole. But I'd know that gate anywhere. Even after all these years, it still stood like a sentinel, a memory welded into the land. Max sat just short of the opening, tail still, eyes locked on mine, waiting. I stepped closer, boots sinking into the soft pine needles, and laid my hand against the cold metal. My palm came away red with rust. 30 years. 30 years since I last walked through this gate wearing fatigues and a face 10 years younger. 30 years since the last day of Operation Stillpoint. Back then, the base had been functional, barely. Hidden from satellite eyes, buried in the forest like a secret the earth itself wanted to forget. We weren't supposed to be there, not officially. But that never stopped the military before. Off-the-books operations in the middle of nowhere were standard practice during the tail end of the Cold War. Stillpoint had been one of the last. One final outpost where men like me did things no one would ever talk about. And then it was gone. We were told to walk away. No cleanup, no trace, no questions. But you don't just walk away from something like that. I stepped through the gate, and Max followed without a sound. My flashlight flickered, catching on the twisted remains of an old barbed wire fence. The main path had vanished under years of weather and silence, but the bones of the place were still here. Metal, stone, fragments of something larger than any one of us. As we walked deeper into the ruins, something in me started to shift. Like a part of myself I'd locked away was waking up. I remembered voices, names I hadn't spoken in decades. Jennings, Morales, Doc, guys who never made it out. Guys who laughed too loud at night because they didn't want to think about what we were really doing there. The wind moved through the pines with that same low whistle I used to hear on the night watch. It felt like someone, or something, was watching. Not dangerous, just present. Like the forest hadn't forgotten. Neither had I. Max stopped at what used to be the main bunker entrance. The concrete doors were cracked open just enough to slip through. I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I wasn't sure who I'd be once I stepped through. Max glanced back, waiting. So I took a breath, pushed the door wider, and walked in. And just like that, I was back in it. The moss gave way beneath Max's paws, revealing a hatch I hadn't seen in decades. Back then, it had been steel grey and bolted tight, always guarded, always locked. Now the paint had flaked off and time had wrapped it in green like the earth was trying to reclaim what man had buried. But I knew what was under there. I could feel it, like a pressure behind the eyes. Still Point wasn't a place you talked about. Officially, it didn't exist. Even our orders came in whispers. No return address, no medals, no records, just coordinates on a folded paper that burned after reading. We were ghosts, even while we were alive, and yet, here it was, real as bone. I knelt beside Max and brushed the rest of the moss away. The hatch creaked under my fingers, the way old doors moan in haunted houses, and the cold that leaked out wasn't just from below. It had the taste of stale electricity and lost things. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct in me said to walk away. But Max wouldn't stop. He scratched once, twice, then looked up at me with those deep, waiting eyes. So I pulled. The hatch gave after a long groan and a metallic snap. The air that hit me was old, dead air, dry, sour, and heavy with dust and silence. I flashed my light into the black, revealing a rusted ladder leading down into darkness. Max didn't hesitate. He jumped. I swore heart-hammering and dropped the light after him. The beam hit the floor below and spun out into an empty corridor lined with lockers and old power conduits. Max landed with a soft thump, tail up, nose twitching. I followed. The metal rungs were slick with condensation. Every breath echoed in the hollow shaft like a confession. At the bottom, the concrete was cracked and weeping with damp. Max waited for me at the junction of two hallways. One collapsed, the other yawning open like a throat. We stepped in. The base was exactly as we left it, and not. The bones were still there. The operations room with its shattered monitors, the med bay door hanging on one hinge, the faded mission maps curled on the wall. But everything felt warped. Not haunted exactly, but aware. Like the walls had learned to breathe in our absence. The hum wasn't electrical. It was memory. Echoes stitched into steel. Our footsteps disturbed it, and in return the silence pressed in like gravity. Max moved ahead, nose to the floor, turning corners like he already knew the way. He stopped at a sealed door I remembered all too well, level C, secure storage. We weren't allowed down there, even then. Only command staff had the codes. Max sat, ears back, eyes fixed on that door. I stared too, heart sinking, because the last time I saw that door, it was being welded shut, with something still screaming behind it. The air hadn't moved in years, maybe decades. You could feel it, how it clung to your skin like a film of invisible ash. Every breath I took felt like inhaling memory, dry and brittle. The scent was unmistakable. Not just dust, not just mildew, but the kind of stale regret you only find in places built to keep secrets. It was in the concrete, soaked deep into the walls like spilled blood. And Max, he didn't hesitate. He padded ahead, tail low but steady, as if his paws remembered turns my mind was still catching up to. Each step he took echoed faintly, and the sound seemed to linger longer than it should, like the halls themselves were listening, watching, waiting. I recognized some of it now, the wide corridor with the peeling yellow stripe, the cracked overhead lights, frozen mid-flicker, the double doors where we once stood in full gear, adrenaline high, pretending not to be afraid. Only now the silence wasn't just a lack of sound, it was a weight pressing down from every direction. like grief made physical. Max turned left, then right, past the decontamination showers, past the faded biohazard symbols where nobody ever explained what exactly we were trying to contain. The deeper we went, the more the lights above began to flicker, just once or twice at first, then in stuttering pulses that threw our shadows against the walls like ghosts reenacting their last day. I hadn't thought of those men in years. Hale, Demps, Lou, they were young, too young, and I was their senior, the one supposed to bring them home. Instead, we left a part of them here, maybe more than a part. Max paused at a crossroad where the air grew colder, the kind of cold that wasn't just temperature. It was the cold of knowing you're not supposed to be here, of having gone too far to turn back. I crouched beside him. "What are you looking for, boy?" I whispered, but the words fell flat. Max didn't answer, just kept staring down the right-hand corridor. And then I heard it. A sound I couldn't explain, not a voice, not exactly, more like breath. A low exhale, deep and broken, like someone trying to remember how to speak after years of silence. Max stepped forward, slow and sure, like the sound was familiar to him. And for the first time since we'd entered this place, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, recognition. This wasn't just a forgotten base. It was a grave. And something inside it was still alive. The door to the locker room moaned open like it had been holding its breath. Paint peeled from the metal frames, every surface mottled with rust and memory. The overhead light flickered just once, casting a brief, shivering shadow of Max as he padded in ahead of me. And then stillness again, so still it made the hum in my ears feel like a roar. I hadn't planned on finding it. I didn't even remember this room was here until we stepped inside and Max stopped, sat, and stared at the far end, like he knew, like he'd brought me here. Row after row of lockers lined the back wall, some hanging open like yawning mouths, others sealed shut with corroded padlocks. My boots echoed soft on the concrete as I walked down the row, each step pulling something up from beneath my ribs. Guilt. Wonder. The strange, tightening pull of a thread I hadn't realized was still connected. Then I saw it. Third from the end, bent at the corner from where I'd kicked it closed a lifetime ago. Scratched and dented, the dull gray of government-issue steel, but unmistakable. My name. Stenciled letters, barely visible beneath the grime and oxidation. And beneath that, my number, my clearance level, my blood type. The orders I was never supposed to keep, all still there, all classified. My fingers hovered over the handle. For a moment, I didn't move, afraid it would vanish if I touched it. Like maybe this whole place was a dream stitched together by the part of me that still woke up at 2 a.m. covered in sweat. But I did open it. The hinges groaned. Dust curled out like smoke. And inside, God help me, everything was still there. My old fatigues, folded sharp. The patch they'd made me remove after the op. A tin of cigarettes I'd quit halfway through deployment. And a sealed envelope. Yellowed. Fragile. Addressed in the unmistakable script of someone who knew the truth wasn't going to stay buried. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just stood there, staring at it, the heat rising behind my eyes. Because this wasn't supposed to be here. This room was scrubbed, the op erased, the team scattered, the reports buried deeper than any grave. And yet somehow, this locker had survived it all. Untouched, unopened, waiting for me. Behind me, Max let out a low, almost human sound. Not a whine, more like a sigh. Like we'd found something important, or like he knew the next part of this was going to hurt. The recorder was old, military issue, the kind you'd find on debrief tables and intel rooms, thick, square, and built like it could survive a war. The buttons were faded, the casing cracked along one side, but the little red light blinked when I picked it up. Still alive, still waiting. Max sat perfectly still beside me, ears perked, eyes locked on the machine like he understood what it was. Maybe he did. Nothing about this night was making sense, but Max, he was the only part of it that felt like a thread pulling me forward. I wiped a layer of dust from the top and pressed play. A whir, a low click, then static, and then the voice. If you're hearing this, it's not over. I staggered back a step, breath caught in my throat. That voice hadn't touched my ears in 34 years. I knew it like I knew my own name. Hell, I heard it in dreams I never talked about. Captain Eli Mercer. My CO. My best friend. My ghost. The tape crackled again. I'm recording this in case the worst happens. If the mission's been compromised, if we don't make it out, someone has to know. Someone has to come back. Max let out a small huff, tail flicking once against the concrete. I dropped into a crouch beside him, the recorder balanced on my knee like a relic. We weren't told everything, Eli's voice continued. Still Point wasn't just recon. It wasn't just cleanup. They sent us in knowing something was down here, and we found it. Silence. Then a breath. And now it won't let us leave. The tape crackled again, like it wanted to die right there. But it pushed on. There's a vault, Eli said, voice low, shaking. Sublevel 3. It's locked for a reason. If Command told you to open it, they lied. Do not open it. Do not let it out. Another breath. Short. Labored. If you found this, it means the fence didn't hold. The air around me felt thicker, like the past had pulled the walls tighter. I glanced toward Max, who was staring into the dark hallway like something had stirred. I'm leaving this with someone who'll wait, someone who remembers. If he brought you here, it means it's waking up. The tape cut. A high squeal of static, then nothing. I didn't move. Max did. He turned, walked to the door and looked back, like it was time to keep going, like he already knew where the vault was. The further we went, the colder it got. Not temperature cold, but the kind that settles behind your ribs and stays there. Max stayed just ahead, weaving through corridors like he was following old scents no human nose could track. His steps were careful, precise, like he didn't want to wake something. We turned a corner and found the operations room. Everything was still there. Maps curled at the edges, yellowing printouts, red twine stretched between pins marking coordinates I hadn't thought about since the war. A coffee cup, dried and cracked, still sitting beside a blacked-out file marked Still Point, Eyes Only. I reached for it with hands I didn't realize were shaking. Inside were names, my name, Eli's, all of us. Each file had a code stamped at the top. Not just service numbers, clearance levels, psychological evaluations, post-op reports, even a few with DNR stamps, do not recall. The kind of thing they use when something's too dangerous to debrief. My fingers froze over one folder with a red stripe across it. Subject: Containment Site Bravo. Incident 14C. I remembered that day. At least I thought I did. We were told it was an equipment failure. Flashbang misfire. Eli said it was just nerves. But reading now, there was no accident. Something breached the holding vault. Something we never caught. Max let out a low growl deep in his chest. His fur bristled as he moved toward the far wall, where a steel cabinet sat, chained shut. I dug through the desk until I found the key, small and rusted. The chain fell with a metallic thud. Inside were recordings, dozens of them, tapes labeled with dates I couldn't believe, some as recent as 5 years ago. Stillpoint had been collecting intel long after I'd been discharged, long after we were told the base had been sealed. There were personnel logs dated 2007, 2012, 2021. They'd never shut it down, just buried it. I played a few seconds from the most recent tape. A voice, female, clipped, urgent. Subject Bravo displayed external mimicry, attempted verbal contact in known voice print of operator Eli Mercer. Denied request to open cell. Subject became unresponsive. Lockdown initiated. Max barked suddenly, sharp and low, breaking the silence. His eyes locked on something in the hallway. My blood ran cold, because I heard it too. A scraping sound, long and slow, something dragging across the concrete floor. Stillpoint hadn't just been a mission, it was a prison, and we'd just opened the door. Max led me deeper into the maze. The air grew heavier, the corridors tightened. Overhead, I could still hear that slow, scraping sound echoing somewhere in the dark, but Max stayed focused. No hesitation, no fear, just purpose. We reached a door unlike the others. Not just rusted shut or buckled by time, this one was sealed. Heavy bolts lined the frame, a faded handprint scanner dead and useless beside it. Above, a crooked sign hung by one screw, barely clinging to the wall. Sub-level 3. Containment Alpha. The words hit something deep in my gut. This wasn't just a room, it was a vault. Max stopped in front of it, ears pinned back, tail stiff. He glanced at me once, then turned and pawed at a faint crack near the floor, almost hidden by fallen debris. A small gap, just big enough for a dog, just hidden enough for someone who knew it was there. He didn't wait for a command. He squeezed through the gap, vanishing into the dark. I hesitated. God help me, I hesitated, then dropped to my knees and followed. The space inside smelled like old copper and stale air. My flashlight flickered once, catching on something that made me freeze. Machines, a cluster of ancient life support units, the kind built to survive anything. Their casings were dented, screens dark, but the tubes still pulsed, still moved. Max stood perfectly still in front of a hospital bed welded to the floor, and on that bed, strapped down, wired up, barely more than a breathing shadow, was a man, or what was left of one, gaunt, weathered, face marked with scars time couldn't erase. His hair had thinned to patches of gray, tubes snaked into his arms, his chest, his throat. But even through the ruin, I knew him. Captain Eli Mercer, my CO, my brother in arms, my ghost. I stumbled back, breath tearing out of my lungs. This wasn't possible. He was dead. He had to be dead. We all saw the blast. We buried what we could find. There he was, alive, broken but breathing. Max moved closer, sitting at the foot of the bed like a soldier standing watch. His tail thumped once against the cold floor, gentle, steady, deliberate, and that's when Eli's eyes fluttered open. For just a second, just long enough to lock onto Max, just long enough to see me. There was no fear in them, no pain, only recognition, like he'd been waiting for this, waiting for us. The machines hummed low, a heartbeat buried under steel and dust. I barely noticed Max move toward the far wall, where a cracked monitor hung from rusted brackets, cables drooping like vines. Somehow, against all odds, the screen still flickered to life when Max pawed at the base. A terminal booted up, slow, agonizing. Lines of forgotten code scrolled past. Then a prompt. A single blinking cursor. A single word. Vantage. My pulse quickened. The cursor blinked again, then began to load a file, an old report, dated years before Stillpoint was even decommissioned. Project Vantage. Experimental Protocol. Classification. Black Level Containment Asset. Objective. Develop canine units capable of memory tracking, trauma imprint recognition, and post-event retrieval operations. I blinked hard, trying to force the words to make sense. Memory tracking? Trauma imprint? Another line appeared, colder than the last. Subject 017M, codename Max, successfully imprinted to Operator ID 92431, Mercer E. Upon loss of primary handler, fallback imprint initiated to secondary subject based on strongest shared trauma index. I read it twice before the meaning hit. Max wasn't just any rescue dog. He wasn't a pet. He wasn't even stray. He was designed, built by Stillpoint, trained to anchor himself to soldiers marked by trauma, soldiers who carried unfinished missions in their blood, soldiers like Eli, soldiers like me. And when Eli couldn't come home, Max had found the next one on the list. He had found me. Max looked up from where he sat, his gaze heavy, steady, not just loyalty, not just instinct, purpose. He had led me back here, not by accident, not by chance, by design. Somewhere in the dark, something shifted, a low groan through the pipes, the old building settling under the weight of buried sins. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Max had been carrying the mission all this time, waiting, watching, guiding, until I was ready to remember, until I was ready to finish what we started. The screen dimmed, flickered, then went dark. Somewhere behind the walls, deep in the bones of the base, a low vibration began. Not mechanical, not structural, alive. Max stiffened beside me, ears sharp, body tight as a bowstring. A second later, I heard it too. A voice, soft, familiar. It echoed faintly through the cracked corridors like a memory pulled from... Come here. We need you. It's safe. I felt the hair rise along my arms. The voice was wrong, too perfect. It wasn't coming from a radio. It wasn't coming from a speaker. It was leaking from the very walls themselves, bending down the ruined hallways like a hunting call. Max growled low, a sound I'd only heard once before. In Afghanistan, when we stumbled into a valley we were never meant to leave. He knew. Whatever had been locked beneath sub-level 3 wasn't sleeping anymore. Another voice joined the first. This one sharper, harsher. Eli's voice. Sergeant, stand down. Report to command. I swallowed hard, feeling my body betray me, heart hammering, feet twitching toward the noise before my mind could say no. It was instinctive, brutal. It was calling me. Max stepped in front of me, blocking my path, his whole body rigid. He let out a single bark, short, commanding, snapping me back to reality. I stumbled back a step, cold sweat breaking along my spine. It wasn't just a voice. It was mimicry. Whatever was loose down here had learned us, our habits, our words, our memories, and now it was trying to pull us in. A distant scrape rang out, louder this time. Something heavy dragging across the concrete, closer now. The same slow, methodical sound I'd heard when we first came down. Max's hackles rose, his growl deepened, vibrating through the metal floor under my boots. He knew the truth before I did. If we didn't act now, it would find us. Max moved first. Before I could react, he lunged forward, planting himself squarely in the mouth of the corridor, the only way in or out of the containment wing. His body low, teeth bared, muscles coiled to strike, blocking the path, protecting us. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, heavy and wet, dragging something that didn't fit the human shape anymore. The voices twisted with it, overlapping now, a choir of stolen echoes. "Help me. Don't leave. Please. Sergeant, please." I felt my legs lock, heart hammering against my ribs. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to freeze. But Max didn't waver. He stood his ground, a lone sentinel against the dark. And I understood. He wasn't just defending the room. He was buying me time. I dropped beside Eli's bed, fumbling with the straps, the wires, anything that tied him down. The old metal buckles resisted, corroded by time and damp, but I tore at them with raw hands, feeling the seconds bleeding away. Max let out a sharp, furious bark that rattled off the walls, a warning, a challenge. From deep within the corridor, something answered. A low, wet snarl. Not human. Not anymore. I caught a glimpse, just for a heartbeat. A shape slithering between the broken lights. Limbs too long. Movements too fast. A patchwork of something that once was human, now stitched into something else. Max growled again, louder this time, daring it to come closer. My fingers found the last strap. Eli's body, frail and limp, sagged into my arms. He was barely conscious, breathing shallow, but alive. "Hang on, old man," I muttered under my breath. I shifted his weight, straining against time and terror, as Max barked again, a raw, defiant sound that echoed down the corridor like a war drum. I looked back once, just once. Max turned his head. His eyes met mine. And in that look, I knew. He wasn't coming with us. This was his fight now. The thing lunged forward from the darkness, and Max launched to meet it, silent, fearless, unstoppable. I didn't see the end. I didn't need to. I turned, carrying Eli toward the faint, broken light ahead, my boots pounding a desperate rhythm against the ruined floor. Max had given me a mission, and I wasn't going to fail him. Not again. The air outside hit me like a slap, sharp, cold, real. The trees loomed above, skeletal against the pale bruising of dawn. I stumbled through the last of the undergrowth. Eli a dead weight against my side, his breath thin but steady. Every muscle in my body screamed to collapse, to give in. But I kept moving, driven by something deeper than survival. I didn't stop until the ruined gate was behind us, until the rusted wire and the whispering pines were nothing but a shiver at my back. Only then did I lower Eli to the ground, my hands shaking harder than I could hide. The world was silent, empty, waiting. I turned back toward the trees, half expecting to see Max bounding through the clearing, tongue out, tail wagging like this was just another game. But the woods stayed still. No sound, no movement, just the rising sun spilling gold across the broken earth. I sank to my knees, hands curling into fists against the dirt. The weight of it, all of it, finally crashing down. Max hadn't just saved me from whatever haunted those tunnels. He'd saved me from myself, from the years of silence, from the lies I told just to sleep at night, from the slow, grinding erosion of a life built on forgetting. He had led me back, not to punish me, not to break me, but to make sure I remembered, to make sure the truth didn't die with the men who never got to come home. I wiped a hand across my face, tasting salt and earth and regret. "I'll tell them," I said, voice raw and cracking in the cold air. "I swear to God, Max, I'll tell them everything." The promise burned in my chest, heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. No more hiding, No more running. Still Point wasn't just a ghost story. It was a wound, and wounds didn't heal if you buried them. They festered. They grew teeth. Max knew that, and now so did I. I looked back once more toward the forest's edge, where the shadows still clung to the trees. Somewhere out there, he was still standing guard, silent, steady, waiting for the next lost soul who needed to be brought home. "Thank you," I whispered, the words breaking loose from someplace deeper than grief. The wind stirred through the pines, carrying the faintest echo of a bark. So soft, so distant, I almost thought I imagined it. But I didn't. Max was gone. But he'd never really left.